So I thought it'd be appropriate to read a poem from our friend Kevin Koval's book, A People's History of Chicago. And I thought I'd read a poem about the founder of Chicago, a Haitian man. It is titled, "The Father is a Black Man." I'm going to read a bit of a preamble before I read this poem. There is not a single street in the city of Chicago named in honor of the black man who founded this city. Not an alley. But John Kinsey, a white man who came after DuSable, when DuSable was forced out or pushed out or whatever, he ended up with DuSable's property. And Kinsey has a bridge. Kinsey has a street. Kinsey has a building. And all he did was buy DuSable's house. That's from Laron Bennett Jr. So here's the poem. The father is mixed. The father is black. His mother a slave, his father a French mariner, the first non-native to settle in Chicago. Jean-Baptiste Point DuSable was a hustler. He worked the trap, traded pelts at the frontier, married Kitty Howard, a Potawatomi woman he saw sailing the Mississippi. The traditional ceremony officiated by a chief, the father was cool with the indigenous. They settled at the mouth of the river where the Tribune sits, spewing untruths in English. DuSable spoke Spanish, French, English, and several native dialects. The father, a genius. He made okra and oxtails with saucepois noir, a black bean sauce, and jumu, a pumpkin stew, harvested from the acres he farmed. His house had a large stone fireplace, a piano, a garden, and orchard. He collected paintings, mirrors, and walnut furniture. The father had style. And maybe some gators. He finessed pesos, pounds, and francs from folks traveling through town, down the river, out west, or back east. He stayed serving. A wash and wampums, the father was ballin'. His granddaughter, the first non-native born in Chicago, was mixed. The first child was mixed. The father, a product of terror and rape. The father the city forgets is mixed. The mix made the British nervous. A body Protestants couldn't wrap their heads around. The father is a black man, pushed out by a white man, rich and thirsty. DuSable left to die far from the city, built with his hands, his mixed hands, his black hands. The father is a black man. That's Kevin Koval. I don't know why I wanted to read that today. It just sort of felt like an inspired idea. You know, I had the opportunity to spend a week in Mexico. And we went to Mexico because two community members, Kim and Anne Marie, got married there. Now, like any couple, yeah, give it up. They are on a 28-hour journey to Bali in something called the Dreamliner. I was like, what is the Dreamliner? They keep sending me pictures of them. Now they're in their PJs, drinking some champagne. I'm like, wow, no idea. But it took them a lot to get to the Dreamliner. Together, they have 9 kids. Kim has 6. Anne Marie has 3. You can imagine the level of complexity with 9 children and many previous partners. Getting to the point of marriage was not easy. They were confronted with themselves. So being at the site of their wedding was really a miracle. And as we arrived in day 1, I found myself walking on the grounds of this space, and it struck me very swiftly how deeply entrenched I am in an identity of struggle. How fundamental to the core of my being I believe in struggle. And so I decided to move the next 6 days in Mexico as a spiritual practice. Lola, how much relaxation might you allow? How much stillness might you feel? And how willing are you to lay down the struggle? See, the way that I gain access to freedom is to recognize the limitations and the challenges within race consciousness, within collective consciousness, but not to be entrenched in it. So how do we have the ability to see what is occurring, know our power and our purpose, and not get taken down? So we were sitting there moments after this realization, and I look over, and I'm like, oh, is one of our favorite MSNBC news anchors at the resort. And I'm like, Nathan, it's Ari. And I turn around, and there's Ari Melber. Now, if you don't watch The Beat, you don't know who Ari is, but I watch The Beat, so I know who Ari is. He's a fellow hip-hop head, and he loves to talk politics. He's a lawyer. He's brilliant. And so I look over at him. I go, hey. And he's like, yes. And I said, I'm not going to sweat you this whole trip, but I just want you to know we're big fans. And he was like, really? You recognize me? I'm wearing a beard. I was like, dude, I got you. I see you. So we part ways, and I'm really devoted at this point not to sweating him. And you have to understand that that's a spiritual practice for me. I saw Chance the Rapper at Soho House like about a month ago. I was with 2 like 40-year-old moms having dinner, and they were just like, nah, nah, nah. And I'm like, I couldn't even function. I couldn't be present to the dinner because he was like 5 feet away. My 17-year-old son's FaceTiming me, show me, show me, show me. So it's like, it's hereditary. So that night, Nathan and I went to dinner, and we arrived early to the restaurant on the resort grounds, and beforehand, we said, well, we'll just hang out at this bar. And we're there, and we're just sort of looking around, such a beautiful space, and Ari pops up. And he's like, hey. And I'm like, Ari. And so he's like, so tell me about yourself. All right? Now look, what you need to know is that one of my soul's intentions, one of my points of purpose on the planet is to be a subject matter expert on MSNBC. Man. So he says, tell me about yourself. Now the thing is, you're always walking in these moments where your purpose is knocking at the door. Are you ready? Are you ready? So I tell him who I am, what I'm about, and I'm like, yeah, one of my great desires is to be a subject matter expert on MSNBC, to really bring the transformational context to what's occurring on the planet. And he's sort of like, okay, And I really was like, keep it cool. Keep it cool, Lola. And afterwards, Nathan's like, honey, why didn't you really tell him, like, who you are? And I'm like, I'm trying to keep it cool, Nathan. Like, So, you can have all kinds of things happen in your purpose in very unexpected moments, right? The thing is that there is a unique purpose for you at this time in history. You've heard me say this many times before. It's not an accident or a coincidence that you are walking on the planet with what's occurring on the planet. It's not like, damn, I must have come in at the wrong time. No, it's the perfect time for you to be here now. So my intention for us is to remind ourselves of the unique purpose that we are each here to play at this time in history. I'm here to help us remember that the body of work that Bodhi Spiritual Center stands to be about is the dissolution of the lie of separation that's rooted by fear and shows up as homophobia, transphobia, racism, sexism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. That's the divine appointment you called in. So we can't be at the effect of what's occurring right now. We have to be moving like, oh, baby, this man gives me so much material. He has come such that my voice and your voice can be loud. Not so you can be quiet. 100 years will go by, 1,000 years will go by, and we will look back and we will say Donald Trump was one of the great healers in the consciousness of humanity. That is the truth. That is the truth. And what it requires is that you and I speak. Speak. So I would love it if I could give you a little bit of background about how I got to this spot, and a little bit of background about how we got as a community to this spot. Because if you weren't here the Sunday after the election, you missed my talk. And because there's some higher idea of which I don't understand, we also lost that talk. There is no trace of that talk on the planet. It just dissolved. So if you weren't here the Sunday after the election, I just want to recreate it for just a moment. I was explicit that day in saying that the racist rhetoric that occurred through the entire campaign just got elected. That occurred. And we should not be surprised at all that what is occurring at this point in time in this country should not be a surprise to anyone. This man told you exactly what he believed in, and he has not wavered. So we have to ask ourselves, what is going on in the consciousness of humanity that would hear the rhetoric that he offered and then be surprised? That's some kind of insanity. So that's a little bit of background about where we've been in the last year. Now, for me, I was raised Catholic. I left the Catholic Church when I was 13 because my mom left my dad for a woman, and that was a problem in 1992 in the Catholic Church. Turns out in 2018, it's still a problem, all right? So for me, it was a matter of integrity. I could not be in that space and honor my mother. Do you understand? I started reading Black liberation theology in 1992. I became intimately familiar at the age of 13 on the impact of colonialism and Christianity on the planet. And I could not co-sign with that. I am now the mother of biracial children, so there's an added level of commitment. It is now not only just an idea or a concept, it is my babies. So it doesn't work for me to be involved in organizations and institutions that knowingly and unknowingly move forward an agenda that affirms the establishment of the lie of separation. I want to talk to you a little bit about how that happens, because if you stay asleep, you'll miss it because it's all over the place. And it gets cloaked in real hip-looking fly churches, hot ministers. They look so fine. The music's so good. Never mind their stand on the LGBTQ community. They're even talking race now. Ooh, I can get with that. Just don't ask too many questions. So let me talk to you about a man that I've talked to you about before. His name is Howard Thurman. He was a mentor to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and I thought it would be important for us to understand in this weekend, where did Dr. King come from? One of my favorite books is called Jesus and the Disinherited. I quote it frequently. And in that, Howard Thurman writes, living in a climate of deep insecurity, Jesus, faced with so narrow a margin of civil guarantees, had to find some other basis upon which to establish a sense of well-being. He had to. He had to find some other way. He did not walk the planet as a man of privilege. He was a Palestinian Jew with Roman occupancy. Get that. He knew that the goals of religion, as he understood them, could never be worked out within the then established order. Perhaps that's familiar with what we're dealing with now on the planet. He knew that the goals of religion, as he understood them, could never be worked out within the then established order. Deep from within that order, he projected a dream, the logic of which would give to all the needful security. There would be room for all, and no man would be a threat to his brother. The kingdom of God is within. He had a dream. Jesus had a dream. Now, the problem with what has occurred in the last week, and you know, if I were to speak to every crazy thing that this man says, we would be talking only about that. And quite frankly, I'm not willing to give him that gift. Every once in a while, though, we got to make sure we're staying awake. So here is the challenge with hateful rhetoric. The challenge with hateful rhetoric, no matter how subtle or no matter how closeted, it gets into the subconscious mind. And even if the worst case scenario does not happen, you have invoked the power of fear. Now, a friend of mine recently said to me when I was officiating a ritual with an evangelical Christian minister, my friend said to me, "Man, it was like watching Christ and the Antichrist." And I was like, I knew exactly who she was saying the Christ and the Antichrist was, but actually that's the danger of the narrative. The danger of the narrative is that a radical voice of inclusion gets deemed the Antichrist, and a voice of exclusivity that's sexy and seemingly kind gets deemed the Christ. Do you understand how insidious that is in the subconscious, in the collective consciousness of humanity? So when we invoke fear through hateful rhetoric, we start to corrode people's personal power. Now, we as a community exist to awaken power. So it's deeply personal for me when tactics are used to erode personal power. Howard Thurman goes on like this: the ever-present fear that besets the vast poor, the economically and socially insecure, is a fear of a different breed. It is a climate closing in. It is like the fog in San Francisco or in London. It is nowhere in particular, yet everywhere. There are few things more devastating than to have it burned into you that you do not count, and that no provisions are made for the literal protection of your person. The threat of violence is ever present, and there is no way to determine precisely when it may come crushing down upon you. In modern power politics, this is called a war of nerves. The underprivileged in any society are the victims of a perpetual war of nerves. The logic of the state of affairs is physical violence, but it need not fulfill itself in order to work its perfect havoc in the souls of the poor. What we are dealing with, folks, is a mind game. The reason this community exists is to keep people's minds right. If you fall asleep and you get sucked into race consciousness, where the lie of separation is very fierce, you're at the effect of the circumstances around you. The greatest gift we can give the parts within us that are disenfranchised, or the people upon this planet with which we walk who have had that experience, is the gift of truth. Now, how do I define truth? Well, let me tell you what else happened on this trip. I'm sitting there, minding my own business, had 3 cute bathing suits that I would rotate. And all of a sudden, this man starts walking around. This man right here. Okay. So this man on the left is a guy named Carl Lentz. He is the senior minister of Hillsong in New York City. He baptized his good friend Justin Bieber, along with many other famous folks. And that is how he walked around for days, except the bathing suit he wore was much smaller. I have never seen such a thing. I mean, very few men can pull that off well. He pulled it off. So I happened to be with this group of human beings that knew who he was and flagged him down. And one of the couples that was at the wedding, their son goes to his church. And I'm just sitting back, because if I start talking, the wedding runs the risk of being ruined. So I'm silent. The day goes by. And the next day I walk up to this couple whose son goes to his church in New York. Now they have about 10,000 people that gather in person in Manhattan. every Sunday. And I crawl into the cabana of this couple whose son goes to his church. And I start asking them questions. And I'm asking them questions about his church. And do you know, no more than 2 minutes later, he is in the cabana with me. So now Carl is in the cabana with me in his little bathing suit. And there I am with this other couple. And they're talking, they're asking him all kinds of questions about Hillsong and na-na-na-na-na. And they're like, Lola, you should tell Carl what you do. And I'm like, oh, Lord. But remember, your purpose is always available for you to step into. So there I am. And I said, well, I lead a non-religious spiritual center in Chicago. And we exist to support people in practical spirituality so that we can move from the theoretical to an experience of life that really works. And he was like, okay, that sounds cool. And I think he said something like, so who is Jesus for you? That's always the question. So who is Jesus for you? And I said, well, Jesus for me is a master teacher. He was one that walked on the planet. I experienced him as my teacher. He was here to provoke the possibility of humanity. And he was like, so he's not your Lord and Savior? I was like, no. I am my Lord and Savior. There's a power and presence that moves and breathes and has its way in, through, and as me. And is the very same thing that moves and breathes and has its way in, through, and as you. And the instigator that Jesus was to stir that. And he was like, oh, okay. And I said, so let me just ask you, because I'm like, we're here now. I said, where is your community around the LGBTQ community? Woo, oh, ow, woo, oh, oh, ah, ow! Hey, see my bathing suit? Do you see it? And I was like, all right, Lola, don't ruin the wedding weekend. So I just let him do what he does. And I said, you know, Carl, I think the fundamental question is this. The fundamental question is, do you believe that humanity is inherently whole, or do you believe that humanity is inherently broken? To which he swiftly responded, well, obviously it's B. Obviously humanity's broken. I said, and therein lies the point where we move away, you know. And I said, if God is all there is, if evil is not real, then how could anything be created other than perfectly? How? So you don't believe that evil is real? No, I do not believe that evil is real. I believe that we have been given something called free will. And from that place, we have complete autonomy and authority to make all kinds of choices, thus this experience of suffering. See, what that requires, though, is you be someone that is willing to take such a high degree of responsibility for yourself and your life that you would have to stop outsourcing blame to some being in the sky. Most human beings do not want that level of responsibility. It is far easier to point the finger at some deity that is pulling the puppet strings of your life. Evil is not real. You are whole and holy. You are perfect exactly as you are. There is nothing you could ever do that could ever hurt, harm, or hinder the nature of your being. You are one with all that is. And that is what this community exists to be about. Because it is our firm belief that if we could stir the soul of as many human beings as possible to know their inherent oneness with all of life, we would walk on the planet vastly differently. Howard Thurman goes on to say, the first task is to get the self immunized against the most radical results of the threat of violence. When this is accomplished, relaxation takes the place of the churning fear. The individual now feels that he counts, that he belongs. He senses the confirmation of his roots, and even death becomes a little thing. So when I'm sitting in that cabana and Carl is spinning a tale of the inclusivity that exists in his community, I must be immunized from fear so that I can speak my truth. Because here's what's very dangerous. To have highly attractive church communities with powerful music and sexy pastors unwilling to tell you their theological perspectives on your personhood. And that is growing at a rapid and alarming rate in the United States of America. And if we do not understand the strategy with which this is being communicated, we will fall asleep. Since then, I've watched many interviews of Carl. He was recently on The View. Joy was trying to push into him around his position on the LGBTQ community. And he danced and he danced and he danced. And it gets so uncomfortable that people back up. Because to have the conversation that confronts the insidious lie of separation and the collusion with colonialism is too scary. But if this community of people is not willing to have the really honest conversations in masterful ways, this lie perpetuates itself. So I just thought that in honor and in reverence for the demand given by Oprah on Sunday evening, that I may clarify a few things. We believe, as intrinsically connected organisms, it is our responsibility to care and tend to the most vulnerable among us, such that all of humanity may experience material peace and comfort. We believe entitlements are our collective moral mandate to a loving and just global society, ensuring access to food, shelter, education, and health care. We believe diversity of race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, and religion demonstrates the most glorious aspects of God. The multiplicity of our unity is celebrated through our differences. You are a part of a radical community. You are a part of a radical community that will say unequivocally it stands in fierce support of the transgender community, not as a political ploy, but because we fundamentally and theologically believe that it is impossible that anyone be created other than holy and divinely. We believe that the transgender experience is holy, ancient, mystical, and worthy of celebration, a divine appointment that stirs uniquely in the soul. We believe that a woman has dominion over her uterus, is divinely guided to determine the future of her fetus, and has agency over her entire body. We believe that evidence-based practices demonstrate the evolution of human consciousness and greatly advance our understanding of this vast universe. We believe science-based research is essential in addressing climate change and caring for our planet and its resources. You know, it's under some degree of question whether the 7 words that we just addressed that came down through the CDC as being banned were in fact banned. It's unclear about that. It's up for interpretation. That's being debated right now. But I thought it was just some rich material, and that we should get clear around what Bodhi Spiritual Center stands to be about, because you don't want your minister dancing around in a cute bathing suit in Mexico, unable to clearly state what we believe. So Oprah Winfrey gave an invitation on Sunday night. I have not seen one movie in 2017, not one movie. But there was a remaining group of people in the wedding that wanted to watch the Golden Globes. And I heard that Oprah was winning an award. So a bottle of good wine and a little bit of Oprah was enough for me to say yes. And she extended an invitation. She said, what I know for sure is that speaking your truth is the most powerful tool we all have. Yes. And it is critical at this time in history, with the divine appointment that your soul has called forward, to be in form now. That you become very clear on what you believe, and that you become willing to speak it, even when it's scary, even when it's inconvenient, because you never know what might stir in Carl. You never know what might stir. There are communities in our very city that are not far from us, that are some of the fastest growing communities in this city, that are unwilling to marry 2 people of a shared gender identity. That's blocks away, and they're growing like wildfire. And the question is not being probed, what do you believe? So when we talk about oneness, let us be really clear what we're talking about. It is not some benign, limp concept. It is a radical idea of which the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King co-signed on long ago. So Bodhi Spiritual Center, I thank you for being a community that gives me permission to speak radically. I thank you for being a community that gives me the privilege of living in my power and in my purpose, and I feel confident in the evolution of humanity. Many blessings.